Nothing sucks more than having the opportunity to make that life-changing photo and you turn on your camera and you get that dreaded red low battery icon. Unfortunately, it's a reality that many of us face with mirrorless cameras. Here are 11 ways to squeeze as much juice as possible out of these mirrorless camera batteries so that you don't miss that shot. So each one of these things on their own are not going to increase your battery life by dozens of photos, okay? And combined all together, they're not going to double the life of your battery, but that's not the point. The point is to get as many photos as possible out of our batteries so we have less of a chance of missing that photo. And the first one we're going to start with is image stabilization. Most cameras today and lenses have image stabilization built in. Now, it may seem like magic how it works, however, it does still take battery power. So when you're out photographing in the middle of the day, you have a fast shutter speed, it's bright light, you don't need image stabilization. So turn it off, save it for later. All it's doing is wasting that battery. So if you have a lens with an image stabilization switch on it, turn that switch off. If you have built-in image stabilization in your camera, or you control your lens stabilization through your camera menu, go in and turn that off and just save it for later on in the day or when you get into low light and you do need image stabilization for going down to a slower shutter speed, then turn it on. And when you do turn on image stabilization, some cameras have a bunch of different modes. And breaking down these modes, one of them is a continuous mode where image stabilization is always on whenever the camera is powered on. And the other one is shooting only, where when you press that shutter button halfway, indicating to the camera that you are about to make a photo, then it turns on the image stabilization. If you have that capability, I would recommend setting it to shooting only so that that image stabilization is not on all the time when your camera is, further draining that battery. Speaking of low light, if you're using autofocus, every camera has a autofocus assist lamp, sometimes called autofocus lamp, autofocus illuminator, autofocus assist, something like that. But when you are in low light and you go into autofocus, that camera is going to shine a really bright light to try to assist the autofocus in that low light. Now, it may not come on for very long, but it is draining that battery. It is using some juice. And these lights don't reach very far either. So unless you are taking a photo of an inanimate object right in front of your lens, I would turn that autofocus illuminator off because it's really not doing anything for you if your subject is more than a few feet away. Speaking of autofocus, unless you're making photos of moving objects that are constantly changing the distance between themselves and your camera, stay in single shot autofocus or AFS, where when you command autofocus, it's going to calculate autofocus once and then stop. Because every time that autofocus motor is moving, it's using your battery. If you are in continuous autofocus, where it's constantly calculating that focus distance, then you're just draining your battery if you're taking a photo of a still object. Or you could learn to become proficient in manual focus, where now you are the motor and you're not using that camera's battery to turn that motor. Get proficient in your camera's manual focus assistant tools so that you can quickly get to that focus point and make sure that your photos are sharp every time without using additional battery power. And be disciplined with the shutter. Every time you press that shutter button, you're using up the battery. Only make a photo when you really know that you're going to keep it. Don't just take photos just to take photos. In the end, you're going to appreciate that by not having as many photos to go through when you get home. But the more disciplined you can be with that shutter button, the less you're going to use up that battery. And turn off that auto review feature, where every time you make a photo, you press the shutter button, that image pops up on the back of the screen so that you can review it. Turn it off. You don't need it coming up automatically all the time. You can press the playback button if you need to, if you absolutely need to make sure that something in the photo was sharp or that you got the timing or exposure correct. But otherwise, turn it off because that LCD screen eats up the juice And if it's coming on all the time to show you your last photo, you're just going to drain your battery even more. Speaking of the display, learn your camera's displays. Most of these mirrorless cameras have an eye sensor where you can turn off all of the displays, the LCD and the electronic viewfinder, until it senses that your face is approaching that electronic viewfinder, and then it will turn the displays on. And pay attention to your display brightness settings. That LCD screen should only be on full bright if you really need it. If you're outdoors in bright sunlight, there's a lot of glare and you can't see it, then turn the brightness up all the way, because when that brightness is all the way up, it's going to eat up your battery like nothing else. So if you're in dim light or just normal walking around, try setting that brightness to a mid brightness level or even lower, and then only turning it up when you absolutely need to. Most of these fancy cameras today have some kind of built-in communications technology where you can tie your camera to your smartphone to control it or to transfer images, but that takes up battery juice. Only use the Wi-Fi or the Bluetooth if you absolutely need to. Don't just leave it on all the time, because when those systems are running, they are using up your battery. And watch out for your flash. If your camera has a built-in flash, sometimes those things will just go off on their own when they don't need to. So it senses that you are in a dark environment, but your subject is miles away. However, you didn't turn your flash off. And so when you press that shutter button, the flash is going to fire, not illuminate anything, and just waste juice. So only turn on your built-in flash if you absolutely need it. Video. Do you really need video? Video uses up a lot of battery power. So unless you're actually going to do something with it, you're making video because you need it for B-roll or for editing or to upload to Instagram for a story or something, don't just make video just to make video, because when you do that, you're wasting your battery. Any Seinfeld fans here? Shrinkage. Cold can shrink your battery's capacity too. So when you're out in the cold, try to keep those batteries warm. When I'm walking around in a cold environment, I will actually take my camera battery out of the camera and put it in my pocket next to my body to keep it warm, to make that battery last a little bit longer. If it stays out in the cold, in your camera, in your bag, it's only going to shorten the amount of photos that you can get out of that single battery. So those are some ways to make your mirrorless camera batteries last longer. And again, they're not going to double the capacity of your battery. All it's going to do is delay that red low battery warning from coming on, which is the last thing that we want to see when we're out on the trail.